turn to page 7 of the prayer book. In the Buddha's Dharma and Sangha, until enlightened I seek refuge, through merit from giving and the rest. To aid all may I become Buddha. In the Buddha's Dharma and Sangha, until enlightened I seek refuge, through merit from giving and the rest. To aid all may I become Buddha. In the Buddha's Dharma and Sangha, until enlightened I seek refuge, through merit from giving and the rest. To aid all may I become Buddha. May all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings never be parted from sorrowless bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from bias, attachment, and hatred. To the founder, the endowed, transcend and destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened Buddha, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcend and destroyer, the glorious conqueror, subduer of the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcend and destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcend and destroyer, the glorious conqueror, subduer of the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcend and destroyer, the one gone beyond, foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcend and destroyer, the glorious conqueror, subduer of the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides, then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I prostrate, with pure bodies, forms supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best Lord, to you I prostrate, with its supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. Superior, having great compassion, the founder, having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, sublime, pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts. To you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha. 3 ever devout homage. To all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, the flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. From Tushita's hundreds of gods, protector's heart, to tip of this fresh, pure, white, heaped good like cloud, O Lop Tsongkhapa, Dharma's omniscient king, Pray, come to this place with your disciples. In space ahead, on lion throne, lotus and moon, venerable Guru, smile brightly with delight. Pray stay hundreds of eons to spread doctrine as supreme merit, field for my mind of faith. Your wisdom mind sees full range of knowables. Your eloquent speech adorns fortunate beauteous body, fame, glory, outstanding. Homage to you with while to think of, hear and see. Pleasant offerings of water, various flowers, fragrant incense, light perfume, and so on. Oceans of offerings set out and envisioned, offered up to you, supreme field of merit. None but you committed with body, speech, and mind, which I have heaped up since beginningless time. Especially what has contradicted 3 vows, each I confess from my heart with strong regret. In time of strife you strove to learn and practice, shun like mundane concerns, made life essence-full. O protector from depths of our hearts, we rejoice in your powerful great deeds. Venerable Gurus from love and wisdom, glass and slay massed in your Dharma Kaya sky, pray loose a rain of vast profound Dharma on fields of disciples just as needed. May whatever virtue that I've here gathered bring benefit to all beings and doctrine, and may it make venerable Lobsang essential teaching specially shine forever. Hikmet way derchen genresik, dream they camp they wang po jam pelia, dupung malu jom ze sang weda, yang chen ke pe tu gian song kapa, lob sang drak pe jav la so wade. O glorious and precious root Guru, great exceed of lotus on my crown, caring for me with your great kindness, bestow attainment of body, speech, and mind. O glorious and precious root Guru, great exceed of lotus at my heart, caring for me with your great kindness, bestow attainments common and supreme. O glorious and precious root Guru, great exceed of lotus at my heart, caring for me with your great kindness, until supreme awakening remain steadfast. Homage to the exalted 3 jewels. Thus have I heard at one time, the Blessed One was dwelling in Rajagriha on Vulture Mountain, together with a great assembly of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One was absorbed in the concentration of the countless aspects of phenomena called profound illumination. At that very time, the superior Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, was looking perfectly at the practice of profound perfection of wisdom, perfectly looking at the emptiness of inherent existence of the five aggregates also. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said to the superior Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the Great Being, how should a child of lineage train who wishes to engage in the practice of profound perfection of wisdom? Thus he spoke, and the superior Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the Great Being, replied to the Venerable Shariputra as follows. Shariputra, whichever son or daughter of the lineage wishes to engage in the practice of profound perfection of wisdom should look perfectly like this. Subsequently, looking perfectly and correctly at the emptiness of inherent existence of the five aggregates also. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, like this, all phenomena are empty without characteristics. That is, they are not produced and do not cease. They have no defilement and no separation from defilement, have no decrease and no increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness. There is no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visible form, no sound, no smell, no taste, no object of touch, no mental phenomena. There is no I element, and so forth, up to no mind element, up to no element of mental consciousness. There is no ignorance and no cessation of ignorance, and so forth, up to no aging and death, and no cessation of aging and death. Likewise, there is no suffering, no origin, no cessation, and no path, no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and abide in the perfection of wisdom, and because their minds have no obstructions, they have no fear. Passing utterly beyond error, they attain the final state beyond sorrow. All the Buddhas who reside in the three times by relying upon the perfection of wisdom become manifest and complete Buddhas in a state of unsurpassed, perfect, and complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the equal to the unequaled mantra, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, since it is not false, should be known as the truth. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Tayata gate gate paragate parasamgate buddhisoha. Shariputra, this is how Bodhisattva, great beings, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom. Then the Blessed One arose from that concentration and said to the superior Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, well said, O child of the lineage, so it is. The profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced exactly as you have taught, and the Tathagatas will rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, the Venerable Shariputra, the superior Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, and the entire assembly, as well as worldly beings, gods, humans, demigods, Gandharvas, and others, were filled with admiration and highly praised what had been spoken by the Blessed One. In the holy supreme abode of the Dakinis, possessed of clairvoyance and miraculous power, unwaveringly caring for practitioners as your children, homage to the hosts of the three places Dakinis, Akasamaraja Shadra Samrayapai. Akasamaraja Sadra Samarayapai. Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Buddhi Soha. Through the power of truth of the exalted three-jewel speech, may all on the side of negativity, such as the four maras, be stopped. May they become non-existent. May they be pacified. All enemies, obstructors, and hindrances, Shanti Kuriya Soha. The 80,000 types of obstructors pacified, freed from adverse harmful conditions. May all be conducive and perfect auspiciousness, bring happiness and well-being here right now. Saji Peki Juxing Meto Dram Ri Rob Ling Ji Ni De Gyan Badi Sang Ye Jing Do Me Choke Chonam La Janchu Badu Dagni Gyapsu Chi Dagi Junyan Gipe Sonam Ki Drola Penche Sange Drupa Shok Sangye Chonan Choke Chonam La Janchu Badu Dagni Gyapsu Chi Dagi Junyan Gipe Sonam Ki Drola Penche Sange Drupa Shok Sangye Chodan Choke Chomnam Na Janchu Badu Dagni Gyapsu Chi Dagi Chunyan Gipe Sonam Ki Drola Penche Sangye Drupa Sho.
Sounds like it's more fun out there. But we're not here for fun. So let's do a little meditation to begin. So I think we all know how to sit, but the main thing is to keep your back straight. And bring your mind inside, away from external objects of distraction, mainly objects of your 5 physical senses. And once your mind's inside, keep it away from internal objects of distraction, mainly the discursive, sort of scattered, chattering mind, and also sluggishness or darkness, sleepiness. Then find your breath where it goes out and comes in through your nostrils. And then focus your concentration, or put all your attention right there. Then generate strong determination. Think, now I'm going to focus on my breath without allowing myself to get distracted by anything whatsoever. Then try and keep your focus, your attention, your concentration on your breath. long as you can, and the moment you notice that you've lost that concentration, just drop whatever it was distracted you immediately and just come straight back to your breath. So you might need to do that over and over again. So if you've done this meditation effectively, your mind should be a little calmer or clearer than it was before. So look into your mind and check your motivation for being here this morning. So if you find that your motivation for being here, the reason you've come to the centre is simply concern for getting some benefit in this life alone, without any intention to benefit lives beyond this one, recognize that comes from attachment, that motivation, seeking to benefit this life alone. Comes from the delusion of attachment, and therefore following that impulse will leave a negative imprint on your consciousness, like a poisonous seed, planting a poisonous seed. That negative imprint will ripen into one kind of suffering or another in the future, in this life or in a future life. So then replace, with that recognition, discard that motivation and replace it with a positive one. So there are, as you know, there are 3 levels of positive motivation. There's doing something in order to benefit future life within cyclic existence. Or doing something in order to escape, create the cause to escape from cyclic existence altogether. Or the highest level of positive motivation, doing something in order to reach enlightenment, in order to benefit all sentient beings. Benefit all sentient beings by leading them out of suffering and into enlightenment as well. So if we generate the highest level of motivation, that seeking enlightenment for the sake of sentient beings, that automatically covers the 2 lower levels of motivation, getting better future lives, experiencing happiness and benefit in future lives, and getting out of samsara or cyclic existence altogether. So that highest level of motivation, which is in Sanskrit called bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment. So generating bodhicitta is what we should do to motivate all our actions, especially an action like coming to a Dharma center for a Dharma class, or doing any other Dharma-related actions. But we can generate bodhicitta even for our worldly actions, like eating, sleeping, talking, working, and so forth. So to generate, you can think briefly something like this. since beginningless time, I've been living in cyclic existence. This cycle of life driven by ignorance, attachment and aversion and all the other branch delusions, creating actions motivated by ignorance, attachment and aversion, leaving negative imprints on my consciousness and experiencing one kind of suffering and dissatisfaction after another. And mainly, since beginningless time, I've been living in the lower realms, the hell realms, the hungry ghost realm, the animal realm, experiencing the most unimaginable, unbearable sufferings. Not knowing what is the nature of life, what is the nature of the mind, stumbling from one action to another, experiencing one result after another, creating more and more negative karma, binding myself more and more tightly into cyclic existence. Never finding the way out, never finding a guide to lead me out. And when I wasn't born, the few times since beginningless time that I wasn't born in the lower realms, I was born in the upper realms, in the human or the God realm, the celestial realms. Mostly it was in the celestial realms where I burned up whatever positive karma I had, and again found myself reborn in the lower realms. And those few times that I was born human, mostly it was at a time when there are no Dharma teachings around. Or if there were Dharma teachings around, I was born in a place where they hadn't reached, where they weren't available. Or if they were available, I wasn't interested for one reason or another. Or even if I was interested, I didn't find a teacher who could really explain or how to put them into practice, how to integrate the teachings that lead me and all beings from suffering to happiness. Couldn't find a teacher to explain how to integrate them into my life, how to transform my actions from worldly actions into Dharma actions. Hadn't found a teacher. Even though there are many teachers around, I couldn't make that connection. Or perhaps even worse, I found a teacher, someone I thought was a teacher, but in fact it wasn't a qualified teacher, it wasn't a person that had all the qualities that a teacher, Dharma teacher, needs to possess. So I followed the wrong guide, thinking I was on the right track. So all these things happened in previous lives, but this time, I've been born human at a time where the Buddha's teachings still exist, in a place where they're available. From my side, I have an interest in studying and putting them into practice. And I've found genuine teachers, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, like Lama Zopa Rinpoche, like Geshe Tenli. People who've studied the teachings in depth and put them into practice. And themselves lead lives that embody the teachings. So if I think how many other people, even at this moment, have this incredible opportunity, there are very few. 6-7 billion people on earth, how many have the opportunity that I have? Therefore, since I have all these opportunities as a result of the karma that I've created in previous lives, mainly that, to make these connections. Since I have this opportunity, I really must make the most of it, because this life is short and it's getting shorter all the time. And so much of my life up to now has been wasted. So since I have this opportunity, I need to understand how to practice Dharma, and in particular how to follow spiritual teacher. Therefore, I'm going to do this class on the spiritual teacher in order to reach enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. So in that way generates bodhicitta motivation for being here at the center this morning. Okay, thanks. So, what's the topic? Guru devotion. Yeah, I brought the right books. It's kind of a funny term, guru devotion. It's I think some people don't like the word guru. Some people don't like the word devotion. Put them together. But we really have to think beyond the words, you know. To think of the meaning. So in Tibetan, the word for guru is lama. So I think we use the word lama or guru because we don't really have an equivalent in English, do we? I mean, teacher can be anything. Not that there's anything wrong with teachers, but it doesn't quite have the same connotation. Lama Zopa Rinpoche says that in Tibetan, the meaning of the word lama, lama means heavy, sort of heavy with Dharma knowledge. I don't know, it brings to mind like a ripe mango. It's kind of really full and heavy and bursting with sweet flavour. So the guru is someone who's just full, bursting with Dharma knowledge, wanting to share the sweet taste of the Dharma with everybody. So that's the Lama, that's the Guru, the spiritual teacher. Devotion, that's a little more nuanced, I think. Someone who can't be here sent me some questions on the topic, and the first one is like, what is the definition of correct devotion? As in, correct devotion to the Guru is the root of the path. So that expression, how to develop devotion to the Guru, which is the root of the path. So devotion to the Guru is the root of the path. I think that may come from the lam-rim Chenmo, the great lam-rim of Lama Tsongkhapa. But I remember when we first started getting Dharma teachings from Tibetan lamas who'd come out of Tibet, maybe in the early 70s. There seemed to be I don't know if they all naturally did this or there was a conspiracy about how to introduce the Dharma to the Westerners. But they didn't really talk much about Guru devotion, and I think in Tibetan, the Lamas, in Tibetan Buddhism, and I think it's because we would have been kind of suspicious of, some monk sitting up there, and we didn't really know anything about Buddhism, and it there weren't places like this then, And, nobody really knew who the Dalai Lama was, or in the West, or what Tibetan Buddhism was, or what monks or nuns are. We didn't know anything. So if some Tibetan monk sitting up there saying, you need a teacher, and you have to see that the teacher is really a fully enlightened Buddha, and one of the main practices for you to benefit yourself is to make offerings to the Guru. That's the highest way of creating positive karma or merit. I think a lot of people would have been fairly suspicious if they kind of started off like that. But this is really pretty much the very first teaching in the stages of the path, and as it says, it's the root of the path. So, I think with a tree or any plant really, everything's important, but the root is probably the most important part. If you plant a seed in hard, dry, infertile ground, it's not really going to take root. So obviously the ground is important, but for the plant to be healthy, the roots have to be healthy. And so for our practice to be healthy and to succeed and to bear fruit, the root of our practice has to be healthy, and the root of the practice is having a proper relationship with a spiritual teacher. So then what's the definition of having that proper relationship? Kind of depends. In Buddhism, I'm talking about. So Buddhism, broadly speaking, there are two schools of Buddhism, two divisions of the Buddha's teachings, right? Hinayana and Mahayana. Everybody know that? Anybody here for the first time? All right. So, the Buddha's intention was that everybody, all beings, should reach enlightenment, the same level of mind, the same level of perfection that he himself attained. And, having attained enlightenment and having complete understanding of not just his own mind, but everybody's, all sentient beings' minds, he saw that everybody had the potential to reach enlightenment. All living beings, not just people, but animals and insects. Although, not necessarily in that form. As we were just talking. So it's a long path to enlightenment, especially if you're an ant or some other kind of being in the lower realms. And even if you're human, it's a long path. And not everybody can jump into practices that lead to enlightenment right away. So although the Buddha didn't, at the time, 2,600 years ago, whenever it was, didn't present his teachings in sort of graduated, step-like fashion that we study, the way we study them now in the lam-rim, or the stages of the path. And, when I say the first teaching is teaching that correct devotion to the Guru is the root of the path, these stages of the path teachings only, this presentation of the Buddha's teachings only came like 1,000 years ago, when the great Atisha went from India to Tibet. So when the Buddha taught, and he taught for like 40 or more years in India, he gave the teachings that were the appropriate teachings to the people who were in front of him at the time. So in any day, if he gave a bunch of different teachings, he might have been teaching very advanced practitioners in the morning, and then very simple beginner practitioners later in the day, and in the evening, intermediate level practitioners. So he gave people whatever they were ready for, whatever they could understand and accept and put into practice. So it was, if you look over the whole 40-year history of the Buddha's teachings, and you see how they're collected. That's a Tengyur, right? These are the Kangyur, this Tibetan canon. These are the Buddha's teachings. Actually, there are 108 volumes. I don't know. Some of the two layers, and some of these books contain more than one text. So there are 108 volumes of the Buddha's teachings, and over here the Tengyur are the commentaries of the great Indian scholars on the Buddha's, the explanation of these Buddha's teachings by the great Indian scholars. And then that doesn't start even those collections don't even take into account all the thousands and thousands of Tibetan texts that were written over, 1,000, 1,500 years, whatever it is. So if you're presented with these teachings, it'd be very confusing as an individual to know there's so many different topics, and it'd be hard to know where to start, and sort of what is relevant for me at this moment at my level of spiritual development. So when Atisha came to Tibet, he and Buddhism, which had been introduced to Tibet 300 or 400 years before he was invited, it kind of degenerated due to anti-Buddhist activities by the Tibetan government, and such as it was. And so he was invited to Tibet to kind of straighten it out. So one of the first things he did, he wrote this, which was the first sort of lam-rim, or stages of the path text, in order to present the Buddha's, this unfathomable collection of the Buddha's teachings in a simpler way, so that any individual could understand, could find himself or herself where they were on the path, and know what to do next and what to do after that. So it was like a ladder, or a staircase to enlightenment, the way that Atisha presented the Buddha's teachings. And then over the centuries after that, different Tibetan lamas gave deeper explanations of that, and so we have some of these greater and lesser lam-rim stages of the path texts available to us now. So when we divide all these Buddhist teachings into two, there are kind of two schools, the Hinayana and the Mahayana. So the Hinayana literally means lesser vehicle or the smaller vehicle. Some people think that's kind of a put-down title. It's a little sensitive, but anyway, there's a reason why it's called that. And then there's the Mahayana, or the great vehicle. So there's a difference between the two. And the main difference is kind of what I alluded to before when we talk about motivation. For a lot of people, the idea of reaching enlightenment, becoming a Buddha, in order to lead all sentient beings to enlightenment, is kind of too vast, it's too mind-blowing, it's too difficult to get your mind around. I mean, we look at some of the people around, and I think we have to have love and compassion for these people and lead them to enlightenment. I mean, it looks a pretty daunting task, and that's not without even thinking about the ants or the snakes, you know. So if that were the only option, I think a lot of people would think, oh, it's too hard for me, you know, leave it to somebody else. But the Buddha gave another option, which was like, okay, don't worry about saving everybody, why don't you just save yourself? So I think a lot of people could relate to that. Because, you know, we all experience suffering and dissatisfaction, and we all want happiness, and, you know, usually the happiness, the pleasure or the pleasures that we find are kind of very transitory, not that deeply satisfying, and expensive, one way or another. You have to put a lot of effort into it, and then you have to start again. It never lasts. So the Buddha explained it doesn't have to be like that, that there is a state of mind that anybody can attain, which is completely free from suffering, which is totally blissful. I mean, beyond, it's a state of bliss, and it's just unimaginable, and it's a complete cessation of the beginningless suffering and delusion that we've been experiencing since beginningless time. So there's a path to this for oneself, and that's like the path to nirvana, or individual, it's called individual liberation, where you just free yourself from the beginningless suffering by understanding the nature of cyclic existence and understanding the nature of the path that leads out of it. So even though our suffering and dissatisfaction and ignorance and delusion have no beginning, they have an end. So it's really a question of motivation. If you just want to benefit yourself, you can follow that path, the lesser vehicle. And it's lesser because it really only leads one sentient being, yourself, out of cyclic existence. I mean, that itself is like an unbelievable major achievement. You know, given that we haven't found a way out since beginningless time. We talk about beginningless this, beginningless that all the time, but really want to spend a little time thinking, meditating on beginninglessness. It's a really long time. I mean, I don't even know if something that has no beginning can even be described as really long, you know. No beginning. You know, I mean, I feel old, but that's really old, you know. Anyway. So there's that path. The Hinayana. And the Mahayana, the great vehicle, is for those who think, well, yeah, it'd be fantastic if I freed myself from suffering, but I think it's a little selfish just to think, you know, I'm all right, Jack. You know that expression? Is that an American expression? I think it's an English expression. I'm all right, Jack. You know, I'm okay, screw you. So some people think that's not a great attitude. So, and they think, well, no, I feel a bit guilty about getting myself out of suffering and leaving everybody else behind, you know, my family, my friends, and just everybody. So, you know, people who have a more compassionate, more loving, sort of wider mind, the Buddha gave this option of Mahayana, the path that he followed, and becoming fully enlightened, and then spending the rest of eternity enlightening other sentient beings, leading them on the path. So in the Mahayana, there are two paths to follow. There's the Mahayana Sutra path, or the Paramita Yana, the perfection. So yana, everyone knows what yana means, right? Yana means vehicle. It's a Sanskrit word, yana. Y-A-N-A. So Hinayana, hina, lesser, vehicle. So like a car is a vehicle that takes you from your house to the centre, or from where you are to where you want to go. So the yana is like an inner vehicle, a spiritual vehicle that takes you from where you're at now, spiritually, to whatever spiritual goal you want to attain, whether it's self-liberation or enlightenment of all sentient beings. Hinayana, lesser vehicle, or Mahayana, the great vehicle. So some hip translators call them the individual vehicle and the universal vehicle. So it's a little stretch, but it conveys the same concept, you know. Individual vehicle and the universal vehicle. So in the Mahayana, the great vehicle, the universal vehicle, there are two divisions. The Paramita Yana, the perfection vehicle, Paramita Yana, Paramita is perfection Yana vehicle, or the Vajrayana, the adamantine vehicle, or called Tantrayana, the tantric vehicle, or the Mantrayana, the mantra vehicle. There are different terms for this second of the Mahayana vehicles. So the motivation, they're Mahayana because their motivation is the same, to reach enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. They're different in that the perfection vehicle is a lot slower path. So it's kind of slow and steady path to get to enlightenment. The Vajrayana vehicle, the tantric path, is quick way to reach enlightenment. So it's like ascending a very tall mountain. You can go around it gradually, follow the path that takes quite a while, and it's very slow and steady, and it's a safe path. Just one step after another, and it takes quite a while to get to the top. Or you can, scale this kind of the sheer cliff on one side of the mountain, which you may get to the top quicker, but it's very dangerous. And if you slip, you fall to the bottom and get smashed up, and then recover from that, and you have to start again. So although the Vajrayana is a quick vehicle, it's quite dangerous, and the practices that we follow there are more difficult. So then, but whichever of these vehicles that we want to follow, we need a guide. Has anybody here got to where you are without ever having a teacher of anything? So we had an alphabet teacher, we had, anyway, if you think back your life, since you were a kid, you had all kinds of teachers in primary school, and secondary school, tertiary, trade, whatever we do, golf, music, sport, have coaches. There's a teacher for everything, pretty much. Yet there are people out there who say, "Oh, you don't need a teacher to follow a spiritual path. I don't need a guru." It's not true. Following the spiritual path is much more difficult than any of these other worldly activities, learning the alphabet, learning math, geography, golf. So then so if we think of the Buddhist path as the lesser vehicle path, or the Mahayana Sutra vehicle, the slow one, or the Vajrayana, the fast one, there are different ways of looking at the teacher according to each of these three levels of Buddhist practice. So in the Hinayana, the lesser vehicle, the most important thing for you to follow is the vows that you've taken. What's emphasized is the practice of pure morality. So whether you're a monk or a nun or a lay practitioner, you take what we call these pratimoksha vows, the vows of individual liberation. So the name of the vows tells you the nature of the path right there, the vows of individual liberation. So these are the vows that you take in order to free yourself from cyclic existence, from suffering, from delusion. And it's the foundation, of course the foundation of all Buddhist practice, but particularly it's the foundation of the Hinayana, or the lesser vehicle practice, because to attain liberation, to free ourselves from psychic existence, we have to transcend our ego, or ego is the wrong conception of the way the self exists. So when you think of yourself, when you think of I, you think of me, generally there's this feeling in our chest. I don't know, maybe some people feel it in their toes or something. But where's your eye? Is your eye in your big toe? Anybody? So, if you get a fright, or somebody cuts you off in traffic, or somebody in a big crowd suddenly points at you and says, stand up and speak, you kind of have this sense of I here, kind of strong. So that's that I that we feel very strongly in our chest doesn't exist. It's completely made up by the mind. There's nothing there really that warrants that strong feeling. It's a delusion. It doesn't exist. Yet everything we do is for that. It's like working for an imaginary employer. You'll never get paid, Complete waste of time, Well, it happens, even when there's not imaginary. They still don't pay you. But so in order to transcend the ego, we have to realize the nature of the mind. The idea that this I that we feel doesn't exist is just an idea. And it doesn't get us... Of course, it's important to understand that. You have to understand that at the very beginning before you try to transcend it. But the idea that it doesn't exist, you can tell yourself that it doesn't exist all day. And, tomorrow it's going to exist as strongly as it did this morning. So there's more, you have to do more than that. So we have to investigate how it exists, why we think it exists, and all this stuff, We have to examine, the inner workings of our mind with we have to sort of dissect in there with a very sharp scalpel. So that sharp scalpel is our single-pointed concentration that we have to develop. So we sat here at the beginning focusing on our breath, I don't know, could anyone focus on their breath for 10 minutes without their mind wandering off it? A moment? Really? I think like 10 seconds is my record. So I'm always going for personal best of 15. It's elusive though. So perfect concentration isn't focusing on your breath for like 15 seconds or even a minute, It's the ability to focus on an object, whether it's your breath or a visualization or whatever it is, unwaveringly for as long as you like, basically. I mean, you could sit there, and practitioners have for weeks, without eating or drinking or going to the bathroom, just sustained by mental energy. You're familiar with the shini, or the shine is Tibetan for tranquil abiding, calm abiding. You're familiar with that chart? Yeah. With the 9 stages? There's a chart with the elephant and the monkey. So there are 9 stages of developing single-pointed concentration. So there's a diagram Should have one up somewhere. So there's a meditator chasing, and there's a monkey which represents the mental distraction of scattered thought, the monkey mind, jumping around everywhere, you know. And then there's an elephant, which represents kind of the slow, sluggish, sleepy mind that you may feel that you're getting into deep concentration, but you're just actually going to sleep, you know, sitting up. So, so in this chart there are 9 levels of gradually abandoning those distractions as you develop better and better concentration. So again, for that you need a teacher, a meditation teacher. You know, just to pretend I'm staying on the topic. So, in order to develop that perfect concentration, you need a perfect foundation for it, which is the pure morality. So on the basis of pure morality, because if you're sitting in your session, you know, developing concentration, and then in the break times you're going out killing people and stuff, it's not really going to work, you know. So, or even if you're smoking, you know, as long as you're under control of strong delusions, internal, strong external habits, very difficult to develop concentration. You know, I think it's good if we can at least start our development by doing 5 or 10 minutes meditation on the breath, trying to develop some focus every morning and every evening, you know. Just to start planting those seeds and actually developing, you know, it takes like kind of weight training, you know, for the mind. You know, you start off with lower weights and then you gradually build up, you know. So unless we have a basis of pure sort of ethical, moral conduct, it'll be impossible to develop perfect concentration, because too many distractions will come in from all directions. And then having developed perfect concentration, and there's a state of mind that you reach towards the end, right at the end. You see in this diagram of the 9 stages, there's the monk who is the meditator, is kind of floating off into space, you know. So that's a level Lama Zopa calls rapturous ecstasy. So I'm not quite sure what the Sanskrit term is for that, but rapturous ecstasy sounds like, wow, that'd be good. But it's only a step on the way. You can't get stuck on rapturous ecstasy, unfortunately. But the other side is it gets better than rapturous ecstasy too. So there's like, you know, banging your head on the wall. Why are you banging your head on the wall? Oh, because it feels so good when I stop. So, you know, attaining liberation is a bit like that, you know, banging our head on the wall, experiencing suffering since beginning of time. So the bliss that you feel when it's finally over is like indescribable. So you need a teacher to give you refuge in the precepts of pure morality. You need a meditation teacher to guide you through the jungle of the mind, meditation, because it's easy to go astray. You might get stuck on the rapturous ecstasy. And that's a mistake, because eventually that runs out, and then you get used up all your positive karma, your merit, and you get reborn in a place where you can't meditate. So you develop perfect concentration, and then you turn that concentration to understand the nature of your mind, to develop perfect wisdom. So these are called the 3 higher trainings: conduct, concentration, and wisdom. So perfect conduct, perfect concentration, perfect wisdom, you escape. You need a teacher for all of it. So the Hinayana, or the lesser vehicle teacher, teaches you, gives you the precepts, teaches you meditation, teaches you about the nature of the mind. But if a teacher tells you to do something which contravenes your precepts, you don't have to do it. Your precepts, the vows that you've taken, are higher authority than your teacher. So, in a sense, your devotion is to your moral conduct above your devotion to your teacher. In the Mahayana, so the Mahayana Paramitayana, if your teacher tells you to do something and you don't think that sounds right, or something that you don't want to do, or there's some reason you can, politely refuse or discuss it with the teacher. Can you? I can't do this because of that. And if a teacher says no, well, I think it's still better that you do it. You can go back and forth a couple of times, 2 or 3 times. Then if the teacher says no, you really should do it, then you should probably do it. In the Vajrayana, it's not like that. If whatever your teacher tells you to do, you should do it without question. So that means you have to be very careful in who you're going to pick as your teacher, right? I mean, if you're following a path where you're going to do whatever the teacher tells you without question, you better be sure that you found the right teacher. That's why it's a dangerous path. It's fast. If you find, it's like there's a saying that when the right student and the right teacher come together, I can't remember the rest of the saying, but it's a good thing. It really works. It's like a rocket to, huh?
Is it when the student is ready, the teacher will appear?
That's not a saying. That's the end of the saying. That's the end of that saying. This saying is when there's a right teacher and right student come, something happens, but I can't quite remember what it is. But it's good. But that's another good saying, what you said. But there's a bit of a danger, sort of passivity there too, Well, I'm going to stay in my room watching TV, and when I'm ready, the teacher will come through the door, It's probably not going to happen, So getting ourselves ready, whether you know it or not, is a bit of a process, So Tibetan Buddhism, what we study and practice here, actually it's not according to the Dalai Lama, it's not really Tibetan Buddhism. It's really Indian Buddhism, as practiced in Tibet. As practiced, as developed in Tibet, and the tradition that the Dalai Lama says we follow, or we should follow, is what he calls the Nalanda tradition. So Nalanda was one of the three great Buddhist universities that flourished in India, in the first, second, third, fourth, fifth centuries of the Common Era. There was Vikramashila and Odantapuri and Nalanda. So Nalanda was where a lot of the famous teachers like Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti and Shantideva were. The authors of a lot of the texts in the Tengyur. And there's a tanka in the back corner there with the Buddha, and then there are 17 pundits of or great scholars of the Nalanda tradition. That painting was, I think, commissioned by the Dalai Lama to show where the teachings of Tibetan Buddhism come from, or should come from. And if the lineage can't be traced back to these great teachers, then it may not be an authentic lineage, and it's something that maybe we shouldn't pay that much attention to, put into practice, So if we're practicing the Vajrayana, which is really what Tibetan Buddhism, or Indian Buddhism as developed in Tibet, is Vajrayana, and where the correct way to follow teachers, to do whatever your teacher tells you without question. Why I do that is because the essence of devotion, as it says as a subtitle of this book, which is, Lama Zopa Rinpoche's, our teachers' collected teachings on Guru devotion, or on, practicing Guru. It's called, the subtitle is Seeing the Guru as Buddha. So that's really the essence of that's why we should do what the teacher tells us without question, because the teacher is a Buddha. The teacher is a Buddha appearing in human form according to our karma. So, what was the question? What's the definition of correct devotion? As in correction, devotion to the Guru is the root of the path. That correct devotion is seeing the Guru is a Buddha, is an enlightened being, appearing in that particular aspect in order to guide me to enlightenment. So in terms of, the details of practice of Guru devotion, this is by far, I think, the most complete, extensive, comprehensive book that's out there. So you can see it's not a simple practice. It's nearly 500 pages. How could that be simple? But it's really really until I read this book, I really, I'd been playing with this for like 30 years at that point, even more. I really, until I read this book, I really didn't know what practice was, And especially the Vajrayana, So one of the key texts on how to follow the Guru in the Vajrayana tradition is called the 50 Verses of Guru Devotion. Everyone heard of that? Who's heard of it? You're so humble. Don is one of the first students of Kurukulla Centre, one of the very first. Did you come to Wisdom Publications in Newbury Street? Yeah. "50 Verses of Guru Devotion." So Wisdom Publications have published Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on that text. It's called The Fulfillment of All Hopes. Do we have that in the bookstore?
We had in the past, but I don't know.
Yeah, anyway, if anybody wants a copy, Karen can order it for you in the bookstore. You get it online, whatever. Fulfillment of All Hopes. And there are a couple of commentaries, a shorter commentary and a longer commentary with the root text by Geshe Ngawandage from the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives, teachings given back in the 70s, on lamayeshe.com, on the archive website. And so you can just get those. We can send out the links.
Yep.
So tomorrow, when does it go out tomorrow?
Tomorrow morning at 7 to 9.
This week. So if you're everyone on the mailing list to get the this week. If not, you can see Marianne. But so we'll send out the links to those teachings by Geshe Dage on that text. But I thought I'd launch into it. We only have a couple of weeks for this, so it can barely scratch the surface. So we'll look at, start looking at the 50 verses of Guru Devotion. So I don't know how closely you follow the Buddhist scandal news. There are websites that do. So lately, it's not only Harvey Weinstein or Weinstein or Weinstein, or how you pronounce it. Weinstein, or Kevin Spacey. There's some gurus who've been naughty, or abusive actually. Sogyal, and that's the kind of the big one, the author of Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, which was like this huge Tibetan million seller. He's been accused by his students of various abusive behaviours. So for those students, it's very difficult. Because if you're doing the practice correctly, you say, well, he's a Buddha, and everything he does is kind of enlightened activity. And yet there are all these students who've experienced sexual abuse or physical abuse or verbal abuse or all kinds of exploitation from him and this and that. So what do you do?
What was the second name? The second person that you named.
Did I name a second person?
I thought you did.
Yeah, I was going to, but I couldn't quite remember his name. Is it... you mean Kevin Spacey?
We don't know about it.
Yeah, no, I said Harvey Weinstein, Kevin Spacey. I said Sogyal. There was the Lama from... was it Lama... What's his name? Anyway, the one from New York, from Wappinger Falls. Lama, what's his name? Norla, yeah. Lama Norla. He was outed, and then some of the Zen teachers have been outed and disgraced, and in our own organisation, we had a different kind of rift back in the early 80s. In this organisation, that founded by Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, back in the early 70s, we've been pretty free from scandals, fortunately. Certainly Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa, totally. And most of the teachers who've come to our centres have been pretty good. There've been a couple of blips here and there, but nothing major. But in terms of the principles of Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, their behaviour was and is exemplary, and so we've been very fortunate. A lot of other organisations have been torn apart by crazy wisdom. For example, the Shambhala organisation had skeptics when the Lama who founded that, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, was seen to smoke and drink and have sex with female students and maybe male students, I don't know. So there was a lot of difficulties created by that, and then when he passed away, he appointed a regent, and the regent had AIDS and had unprotected sex with all kinds of students, knowingly, and so that caused a huge rift in the organisation, and so there was that. And other teachers have been accused of things. So we had a centre in England called Manjushri Institute. It started in 1975. They found a place in 76 at Conishead Priory in Cumbria. And in 77, Lama Yeshe sent teacher Kelsang Gyatso. It's called Geshe Kelsang, although some question whether he actually completed his Geshe degree or not. Sent him there as a resident teacher, and over the years he developed a very loyal following of students, and in the early, about 82, 83, they decided to secede from FPMT, our organisation, sort of break away and sort of take the centre. Rather than him leave the centre, he took possession of the centre. It was kind of a bloodless coup. and there at that point, and so there was a very strong disagreement between him, Kelsang Gyatso, and Lama Yeshe, and there were hundreds of students who saw them both as their guru. So that kind of, in what he did, Kelsang Gyatso, kind of forced a lot of students to choose between two gurus, which is an incredible transgression, in a way, of the student's guru devotion. So we might come back to that later, but a lot of students over the years have written to Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and he's explained how to deal with that particular situation. So, because once you've established that Dharma connection with a Vajra Guru, once you've made that connection, you've accepted this teacher as your tantric guru, and you, in your mind, that this is a Buddha, there's no way out. You can't say, oh no, I made a mistake. No, he's not. You can't do that. You can, but it severs something in your own mind stream, which makes it very difficult to meet a guru again for a long time, you know. So, you know, people who've made that connection, like with Sogyal, and then publicly denounced him, it's kind of a difficult thing to do, you know. But then you face, well, you know that he does these things. If someone doesn't say something, other new students are going to get sucked in. So what do, you know? Now, His Holiness Dalai Lama had a meeting in '93 with a bunch of Western teachers. You can see it online. And he said even then, and back then there were rumours buzzing around about Sogyal, for example, you know. Even then, it's 25 years ago. He said, look, if you see a teacher doing something wrong, you should not only speak to the teacher, but you should make it public. So if you have this guru-disciple relationship, it's a very tough call, you know, to know what to do. So a lot of people don't do the wrong thing overtly, so they keep quiet, you know. But then by keeping quiet, you're sort of complicit. I mean, you can see this in real life with these Hollywood people and all that, you know. But in Vajrayana, it's kind of much more serious in many ways, because it doesn't, you know, breaking your samaya or your sacred word of honor with your teacher doesn't just ruin this life, it ruins countless future lives. So it's kind of a very complex and powerful relationship, but it's not one that should be entered into lightly. That's the point.
So how do you reconcile that with what you said earlier about how the guru appears as the Buddha according to your karma? So if
the Buddha appears as the form of the teacher according to your karma.
right, so then if you're seeing, you're not, you know, these, I guess I'm trying to know the word that you would call these infractions, you know, then, you know, you are finding fault with your guru, is that not your karma?
There's a way, if you see faults, there's two stages in your life. There's before you've made the relationship and there's after you've made the relationship. Before you've made the relationship, you can kind of do what you like, I mean, and, it says that before taking someone as a teacher, you should examine the person for 12 years. I mean, that's a long time, most people don't do that, but that's what it says. 12 years. And when you take a teacher, someone as your teacher, as your guru, you shouldn't be like a dog eating meat. So if there's a hungry dog and you throw him a piece of meat, he's just going to gobble it up without second thought, without seeing if it's poisoned or not, And then if it's poisoned, then he suffers the consequences of not checking. So that's not how like a dog seizing on a piece of meat isn't how we should choose a guru, If someone's written a million-seller book, it doesn't necessarily mean it should be your guru, or someone's appears very charismatic or, has hundreds of disciples. Doesn't necessarily, you finish up in Guyana, So, and if you've made mistakes in your guru practice in previous lives, the kind of thing that can happen in this life is you're going to make a mistake in choosing the wrong person, or having, breaking your relationship. We'll maybe come to it about how to the qualities that we should look for before we take someone as a guru. Am I answering your question, or not quite?
Sort of. I was just trying to think about that. Could your it's a bit of a leap. I don't know what I was going to say. I mean, if you were to experience, I need to put this through.
Everything appears according to our karma. This room looks different to everybody because each of us has different karma, And not just because of where you're sitting, although that's maybe karma too, but someone else?
So you said you should really take your time to find the right teacher. 12 years is a long time, like you said, but what do you do in the meantime? I mean, we're studying and reading and talking to people and coming here to the center, and you mentioned that you could look at Lama Tsongkhapa as your guru, or how do you do that?
Well, that's different. We're talking about a living, breathing, present time person.
You study with a teacher?
Read these books, think about it. It doesn't have to be 12 years. You can come to a quicker decision. But, when Lama Atisha, before he went to Tibet, was wanting to develop bodhicitta. I forget the exact details of the story, but he asked, someone came to him in a vision or something and told him he should study with a Lama called Serlingpa. Serlingpa lived in Indonesia. I think it was Java or Sumatra, I can't remember. And so Atisha and a bunch of his disciples took a boat across the Bay of Bengal, from India to Indonesia to find this famous teacher. And, the Buddhism was quite strong there. Borobudur is one of the biggest stupas in the world, is in Yogyakarta, in Java. And there was Buddhism was very strong in not just Southeast Asia, but spread into Indonesia as well, not just Thailand and Cambodia and Laos, where we still see it. So it was like a 13-month voyage, and he writes about it. It was a very dangerous voyage they took, and then when they arrived. So Tsongkhapa was famous all over India as being this great teacher of bodhicitta. But when Atisha arrived, so all his monks lined up to greet this great Indian teacher who was arriving from India to study there, but Atisha didn't rush up to make prostrations and ask for teachings. Before he went up, he spoke to the disciples and he asked him, well, tell me about your teacher, Tsongkhapa. So he was this famous teacher. He made this dangerous, more than a year journey to meet and study with him. Still, he didn't rush up and take him as a teacher, but he asked him about how does he live his daily life, what does he teach, So he examined him, not for 12 years, but he checked him out. So that's one of the things you do is, if you want to know what a teacher's like, take a look at the teacher's students, Not all of them, but some of them, See what kind of flower garden this teacher's developing, Know the teachings of the Buddha, and then try and listen to some of this teacher's teachings to make sure that what he's teaching is in accord with the Buddha's teachings as you understand them anyway, talk to people, look at the teacher, look at the teacher's daily life, how the teacher spends his or her time. So check it out for a year or two anyway, before really making a commitment, I think.
Shambhala, Trump Rinpoche is actually quoted a lot in the Shambhala Center. I go to the Shambhala Center once in a while, in Brooklyn, and Trump Rinpoche, his teachings are profound and it's unbelievable. I just have that's the one issue, it's like, how do you get past that? Like, all the things he did that were against his vows, and I think he did it. But how do you, being so high, I guess, how do you do those things? How do you get over, the fact that when you're going to these places and taking these teachings that they might be off a little bit because of his actions. Yeah.
Well, that's why I said this crazy wisdom thing is a little tricky, because crazy wisdom, the expression? It's like when a teacher does kind of weird stuff, you got to think, well, is he just like weird, or is there a deep higher purpose? Is it in order to guide certain disciples in certain ways, or is it to because too many people are becoming attached to him in a kind of worldly, in a negative way, that if you do kind of weird stuff, it'll kind of help students not be so attached, or but if it's a Buddha, then everything is enlightened activity, and there's a lot of teachings in this book, for example, of how to interpret or how to think about sort of strange things that your guru does, but it should never be seen as a mistake, but it should be seen as a skillful means in order to guide certain disciples. And if it's something that's not guiding you, then you don't think, well, it's mistaken activity, but it's rather, well, this is not for me, this is for somebody else. Like the Buddha gave all these different teachings, but every teaching wasn't for every disciple. That's why we have these different schools of Buddhism, because people's minds are different, they need different things at different times. One time, one of Lama Yeshe's students started to criticize Trungpa to Lama Yeshe, and Lama Yeshe just cut him off at the knees and said, "You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know who he is. You've got no idea who he is. You don't, just stop speaking like that, because of these strange things that he appeared to do, getting drunk and smoking and doing all things that you don't expect, like a holy." But that's also partly our preconceptions. We expect a teacher to be in a certain way, and that's our fault, I mean, and then people point to the classic examples of Mapa, the way he treated his disciple Milarepa, or Tilopa, the way Tilopa treated his disciple Naropa. And telling him, he said, well, if they're on the roof of a high building, he said, well, Tilopa says, well, if I really had any good disciples, they would just jump off the roof, So immediately, without hesitating, Naropa jumped off the roof, like 3 or 4 floors, then broke his legs, and he was lying in a sort of a crumpled heap at the bottom. And then Naropa left him for a while, and then, because of his powers, he could just he healed him right away. And then he made him do 12 kind of weird things, and Naropa followed, and because of that became enlightened very quickly. I don't know if in this life or in the intermediate state or something, there was some mistake he made that prevented him from becoming enlightened in that lifetime, but then soon after this lifetime he was enlightened. If a guru, these days, if a guru did half of one of those actions, he'd be dragged into court. And, Lama Zopa often says, he never heard of Tibetan lamas in Tibet getting sued by their disciples, but in the West it can be different, So, okay, well, maybe we'll get into the weeds a little more next week, but next week? So in the meantime, if you can have a look at this book, The Heart of the Path, and, there may be a couple of copies in the library you can borrow, or in the library. Or, and this book, Fulfillment of All Hopes. It says Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on 50 verses of Guru Devotion. And there are a couple of, so Marianne will send out the links to the versions online, and we'll look at it a little bit next week. Okay. Sorry, went a little late.
Turn to page 38, please. 39. Saji puki shuk sing metok drum ri rap ling ji ni de yem pa di sangi jing du mek te o argi droku nam dak jing la che pa shuk je tsun la me ku tse rap ten ching nam ka twing ne chuk chuk ye pa dang lo zang ten pe drun me sa sum gi dro we mun sal tak tu ne gyu chi Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami From my 2 collections, vast the space that I have amassed from working with effort at this practice for a great length of time, may become the chief leading Buddha for all those whose minds' wisdom eye is blinded by ignorance. Even if I do not reach a state, may be held in your loving compassion for all my lives, Manjushri. May I find the best of complete graded paths of the teachings, and may I please all the Buddhas by practicing. Using skillful means drawn by the strong force of compassion, may I clear the darkness from the minds of all beings with the points of the path as I have discerned them. May I uphold Buddha's teachings for a very long time. With my heart going out with great compassion in whatever direction the most precious teachings have not yet spread, or once spread have declined, may I reveal this treasure of happiness and aid. May the minds of those who wish for liberation be granted bounteous peace, and the Buddha's deeds be nourished for a long time. Even this graded course to enlightenment completed, due to the wondrous virtuous conduct of the Buddhas and their children, may all human and non-human beings who eliminate adversity and make things conducive for practicing the excellent paths never be parted in any of their lives from the purest path praised by the Buddhas. Whenever someone makes an effort to act in accordance with the 10-fold Mahayana virtuous practices, may they always be assisted by the mighty ones, and may oceans of prosperity spread everywhere. In that snow mountain encircled land, source of every benefit and joy, may Lord Tenzin Gyatso Chenrizik remain in life till samsara's end. Savior of the snowland teachings and transmigratory beings, who extensively clarifies the path that unifies emptiness and compassion, to the lotus in the hand, Lord Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be fulfilled. Page 49. Tuk tul chang jing jam gong gao wei Tenzin gyong pao wei kun zo dok po te jok sum kor wei lek mun tu dro ba dak sok do je gun do jap den shok. Page 57. Through this virtue may I swiftly, having gained Guru Buddha state, place each and every sentient being without exception in that state, precious supreme Bodhi mind, may it where unborn arise, and where born never decline, but increase forevermore. Page 75, Mitsema. Mig me te wei the chen chen reisik dream make yam pe wang po jam pa yang gang chen ke pe tu gan Tsongkhapa lob sang dra pe jap la so wa de. Thank you very much, Nick. So next Sunday, 10 to 12, Nick will be here again, Dr. Nick, and teaching on Guru Devotion. We'll stop me or just put your name down if you need to get the newsletter, so you can get the links, and then always updates on whatever's coming up next. So next week's a fairly, Monday night we don't have class because it's President's Day, so even though it's not everyone unfortunately have the day off, we don't have classes. We found it to be not enough people. Then we have yoga, then Damchala's leading discussion group on Wednesday, and then the Sunday is Nick again. I don't think there are any pushers. Oh yeah, one of these strange American days. But you're absolutely right. Tomorrow, yes. And And then Geshe Tenle will be back on Wednesday the 24th. There won't be class on this coming Wednesday. Damchula's talking, but the Wednesday after, Geshe-la's coming back from India with Ani Yeshe. They'll be arriving. Their flight arrives at 6, I think, at Logan Airport, so we'll welcome them around 6:30. And then at 7 o'clock here at the center, we'll have sweet tea and rice ceremony to just welcome them back, just to get together. So whoever can be here would be lovely to join. And then we have a family day coming up. That's somewhere in February, and also save the dates in April. We've got Venerable Rubina will be here from I think it's the first week in April. It's already in the calendar, but no teachings yet. I'll need to close out on the teaching topics. And then the weekend after, weekend of April 13, we've got Professor Robert Thurman going to do a few talks here, as well as we'll have a gala event in April as well. That's it so far, and that's it. Thank you so much. Oh, that's true. My list is long. Light of the Path 2019. So not this year, but next year, May. It's May, right? May. Next year in May, there'll be Light of the Path. It's going to be 3 weeks. We'll put a small thing in the newsletter just so you're aware of it, because then you can start to plan. It's in North Carolina. It's an incredibly wonderful retreat. I've been fortunate enough to have been on 3 of them, or three of them. I didn't say that. No. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who's the spiritual head of the organization. And Lama Zopa is now 72, 73. So whenever we have the chance to get teachings from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, it's incredibly important to go and receive these teachings. You can find on the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive a wonderful amount of his teachings on YouTube, multiple recordings at the FPMT site. But there's something incredibly powerful about being in his presence. We always invite him to come to the center, but as a student, we make our effort and go to see the teacher. So absolutely. And he is in Australia this year for 4 weeks, 6 weeks? 6 weeks. So if you have a chance, that would also be a really nice thing to do. Unfortunately, it's a bit far away. Thanks. Thank you so much, Nick.